Welcome, dear students, to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. K.S. Nagaraja of Deccan College, Pune. He is a teacher teaching this particular course of historical linguistics. In this module, I will be discussing dialectology, or also known as dialect geography. The point is that so far we have not really given much attention to what language is. Because when you look at the society, there are so many varieties. No two people speak identically same. Though it is not possible to collect data from each and every person and to compare them, we assume that on the whole, a particular community which lives in one place tend to speak in the same way, and the variety seems to be same. So though there could be a few idiosyncratic variations across them, they are not so distinctive, not so important from the point of making differences in the language. Therefore, we assume that they all use the same variety, so that is considered as a speech form. However, even some 10 kilometers away from that community, if another community lives, it's very likely that though they claim to speak the same language, they may differ in their way they speak. That means that in order to know whether two communities, given communities, speak in the same way or not, there should be some way of recording their speech, comparing their speech, and decide to what extent they are similar or different. In earlier days, there was no such system of comparing and identifying the speech forms. In fact, it became the responsibility of some scholars, particularly of Europe and later of America, to motivate scholars to study the speech forms of communities. So in this, in fact, this is the important area, because when we take language, that is an abstraction. The concept of language is an abstraction, but what is actually spoken is a speech form. In between, there are various stages. So in this particular course, we are going to study the nature of language, nature of dialect, what is dialect of all, how we can collect data of dialects, how to compare them, then how to prepare dialect atlases, which will tell us which variety of language is spoken, or taken a word, what is the pronunciation of the word in a particular geographical area. So this is the topic of this particular course. The systematic study of regional dialects is called dialectology or dialect geography, or also some scholars call it linguistic geography. But these terms, all the three terms, are not exact equivalents. In particular, the latter terms suggest a much wider regional scope for this subject. Dialect specialists who spend their lives researching the local usages of a single village or place can hardly be called linguistic geographers, though they are certainly dialectologists. By contrast, the geographical designation would be quite appropriate for anyone involved in plotting the distribution of forms over a large area, such as Punjab, Kerala, Scotland, etc., or the eastern United States. There is another difference between these terms. Traditionally, dialectology has been the study of regional dialects, and for many people, this is still its main focus. However, in recent years, dialectologists have been paying more attention to social, as well as geographical space in order to explain the extent of language variation. Factors such as age, sex, social class, and ethnic group are now seen as critical alongside factors of a purely regional kind. But whatever the approach, the contemporary fascination with dialects seems no less than shown by previous generations. Radio programs on dialect variations are popular in several countries, and compilations of dialect data continue to be produced in the form of grammars, dictionaries, folklore collections, and guides to usage. Local dialect societies thrive in many parts of the world. Dialects continue to be seen as a major source of information about contemporary popular culture and its historical background, and dialect variation forms part of the study of change. The most important application of dialectology these days is in education, where the development of dialect awareness in children is widely recognized as a way of getting them to see the heterogeneity of contemporary society and their place within it. Teachers are often faced with a conflict between the child's spontaneous use of dialect forms and the need to instill a command of the standard language, especially in writing. The conflict can be resolved only by developing in children a sense of the relationships between the two kinds of language so that the value of both can be better appreciated. There needs to be an awareness of the history, structure, and function of present-day dialects, and this is what dialectology can provide. The history of regional dialectology. While there has been sporadic interest in regional dialects for centuries, the first large-scale systematic studies in Germany and France did not take place until the end of the 19th century. In 1876, George Wencker began sending out questionnaires to all the school districts in the German Empire. The responses which were received by post were codified. But in this method, pronunciation could not be recorded. The alternative was to send trained field workers to observe and record the dialect forms. Was first time used in the Linguistic Survey of France, which began in 1896. The director, Jules Guilleron, appointed Edmond, a grocer with a very sharp ear for phonetic differences, to do the fieldwork. For 4 years, Edmond went around France on a bicycle conducting interviews with 700 informants using a specially devised questionnaire of nearly 2,000 items. The Atlas Linguistique de la France was subsequently published in 13 volumes between 1902 and 1910. It stands as the most influential work in the history of dialectology. Hans Kurth was an American linguist of Austrian origin. He was full professor for English and linguistics at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. The many varieties of regional English he encountered during these trips convinced Kurth of the necessity of completing a systematic study of American English. In 1926, he convinced the Modern Language Association to begin planning for the project, and in 1931, a pilot study of the New England region was initiated under his direction. It soon became clear, however, that the undertaking was too complex to be completed by a single team of linguists, and the project was expanded to 8 additional regional operations. Kurath guided the vision and goals of the regional projects for 3 decades and oversaw the publication of a series of volumes that are known collectively as the Linguistic Atlas of the United States. He is predominantly known for publishing the first Linguistic Atlas of the US. Is called the Linguistic Atlas of New England, for which he received the Lobert Prize, and for being the first main editor of the Middle English Dictionary. Together with Raven McDavid, he also published a linguistic atlas of the Eastern United States, the pronunciation of English in the Atlantic states. In the first half of 20th century, major projects were initiated in many parts of Europe and Asia, and subsequently voluminous volumes have been published. To name the Indian situation, Sir George Abraham Grayson was the Irish administrator and linguist in India. He worked in the Indian civil service, but an interest in philology and linguistics led him to pursue studies in the languages and folklore of India during his postings in Bengal and Bihar. He published numerous studies in the journals of learned societies and wrote several books during his administrative career, but proposed a formal linguistic survey at the Oriental Congress in 1886 at Vienna. The Congress recommended the idea to the British government, and he was appointed superintendent of the newly created Linguistic Survey of India in 1898. He continued the work until 1828, surveying people across the British Indian territory, documenting spoken languages, recording voices, written forms, and was responsible in documenting information on 179 languages defined by him through a test of mutual unintelligibility and 544 dialects, which he placed in 5 language families. He published the findings of the Linguistic Survey in a series that consisted of 11 volumes in 19 parts. In a celebratory account of his life, F.W. Thomas and Orell Turner refer to the extensive publications of the Linguistic Survey of India as a great imperial museum representing and systematically classifying the linguistic botany of India. However, nowadays there are fewer big regional dialect projects, and some of those that have begun may never be completed. This is mainly because of the large costs involved in collecting, analyzing, and publishing dialect data, but it is also partly because of the new direction dialect studies have taken. Younger scholars are these days more likely to be attracted by the socio-linguistically inspired approaches that developed in the 1970s, with their focus on social factors and on urban rather than rural dialects. So dialectology deals with regional variation in a language. Some concepts of dialectology that need to be understood are the following. Once the speech of dialect informants have been codified, it is analyzed, and the important features are marked on a map of the area in which the informants live. When several points on the map have been located, it is then possible to see whether there is a pattern in the way these features are used. The usual way of identifying dialect patterns is to draw lines around the places where the people use a linguistic feature in the same way. These boundary lines are known as isoglosses. Isogloss so is a line on map which represents the geographical boundary or the limit of regional linguistic variants. By extension, the term isogloss also refers to the dialect features themselves, an extension of the original sense of the word from dealing with a line on a map to reference to the actual linguistic phenomena themselves. For example, in the USA, the greasy or greasy isogloss, that is either sa or za or use, is a line roughly corresponding to the Mason-Dixon line which separates the North Midlands from the South Midlands. It runs across the middle of the country until it dives down across southeastern Kansas, western Oklahoma, and Texas. North of the line, greasy is pronounced with sir. South of the line, it is pronounced with za. Another isogloss has to do with a contrast regarding with a contrast versus lack of contrast in the vowels in such word pairs as pin versus pen, tin versus ten. In these words, E and A before nasals contrast in other dialects, but in the South Midlands and Southern dialects areas, there is no contrast. These vowels have mergers before nasals in these dialects. This explains how country music songs, many of whose writers and singers are from the dialect areas which lack the contrast, can rhyme words such as win and end, both phonetically. In end also loses the final consonant drawn, end becomes n, as in the well-known song Heartless by the Number is mentioned. Bundle of isoglosses. Several isoglosses whose extent coincides at the same geographical boundary. Such bundling of isoglosses is taken to constitute the boundary of a dialect or dialect area. The two examples of isoglosses just mentioned above happen to bundle both along the Mason-Dixon line with greasy and lack of the vowel contrast south of the line, for example, in the South Midlands dialect area. We may distinguish here a few types of dialect areas and some concepts used in dialect studies. 1. Focal area, a zone of prestige from which innovations spread outwards. This area will include the home dialect of the change. However, it may also include neighboring territory into which the change spread early and thoroughly. Relic area, or also known as residual area, an area which preserves older forms that have not undergone the innovations that the surrounding areas have. Relic areas are often regions of difficult access for the cultural, political, or geographical reasons, and thus resistant to the spread of prestige variants from elsewhere. The third one, transition area. In between the focal area and the relic area, there is often a transition area in which the spread peters out or is degeneralized. Focal area tend to be geographically or socio-linguistically central areas, whereas relic areas tend to be geographically or socio-linguistically outlying or otherwise remote areas. Thus, in the case of Low Countries, the focal area consisted of the socio-linguistically central coastal areas. Relic areas are typically found in the periphery, relatively far removed from the focal areas. Lexical difference. Regional dialects may differ in the words people use for the same objects as well as in phonology. Hans Kurath, in his paper, What Do You Call It?, asked, do you call it a pail or a bucket? Do you draw water from a faucet or from a spigot? Do you pull down the blinds, the shades, or the curtains when it gets dark? Do you wheel the baby or do you ride it or roll it? In a baby carriage, a buggy, a coach, or a cab. People take a lift to the first floor in England, but an elevator in the United States. They get 5 gallons of petrol, not gas, in London. In Britain, a public school is private, you had to pay. And if a student showed up there wearing pants, that is underpants, instead of trousers, that is pants, he would be sent home to get dressed. If you ask for a tonic in Boston, you will get a drink called soda or soda pop in Los Angeles. And a freeway in Los Angeles is a throughway in New York. A parkway in New Jersey, a motorway in England, and an expressway or turnpike in other dialect areas. In this context, another term is used, lect. Some scholars feel the need for a more open-ended term which signifies any linguistic variety, whether defined by geographical distribution or by its use by people from different social classes, castes, age, genders, etc. That is called lect. Lect is intended to cover all such varieties: geographical dialect, sociolect, idiolect, the language characteristics of a single individual, and so on. Is a cover term. Mutual intelligibility, when speakers of different linguistic entities can understand one another, we assume that there is mutual intelligibility. This is the principal criterion for distinguishing dialects of a single language from distinct languages. For example, there are cases of non-reciprocal intelligibility. For instance, Portuguese speakers understand Spanish reasonably well, while many Spanish speakers do not understand Portuguese well at all. And of non-immediate intelligibility, whereupon first exposure, understanding is limited, but after a time, intelligibility grows. There are many studies in the sociolinguistic and dialectological literature of cases of various sorts having to do with how to determine to which language various dialects belong, often having to do with the relationship of regional varieties to some standard or superordinate language or to their position within a dialect chain. So we know what language is. The definition of language is not strictly a linguistic enterprise, but sometimes is determined more by political or social factors. Normally, we identify 3 states of society. The first is ad stratum, the forms of a language which affect those of another more dominant speech community. For example, the speech of European immigrants influencing the English language in the USA, their adopted country. One of 2 or more languages spoken within an area by people who maintain their primary languages while receiving influences from the other language involved in the contact situation is called ad stratum. The second type is called substratum, the forms of a language which affect those of another more dominant speech community, particularly the speech of the indigenous population in a colonial or culturally less advanced country, which may influence the superimposed language of the conquering or culturally more advanced power, like Dravidian languages acting as substratum for Aryan languages in our country. Finally, superstratum, the forms of a language which affect those of another subjected speech community. For example, the English language influencing the native speech of former colonial territories such as India, East Africa, etc. There is evidence of considerable borrowing, particularly of vocabulary items from the superstratum. So, languages of roughly equal prestige, such as English and Norse in early England, are referred to as adstrata, where prestige is unequal, as between Normans and Anglo-Saxons, between Anglo-Saxons and Celtic, or between English-speaking Europeans and indigenous Americans. The terms superstratum and substratum are used, the former referring to the language with higher prestige, the latter to the one with lower prestige. Adstratal relationships then are most conducive for borrowings of everyday life vocabulary, even basic vocabulary. In contrast, there are much greater limitations in contacts between languages of unequal prestige. Moreover, in such contacts, the borrowings tend to reflect the social status of the donor language. If that language is a superstratum, loans tend to come from the more prestigious sections of the lexicon, and their connotations likewise tend to be prestigious, at least at the beginning. If the donor language is a substratum, loans tend to be limited to neat borrowings such as new place names and or to have derogatory connotations. These aspects will be studied at some level in another module. Thank you.